Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Education USA webinar. My name is Louisa, and I'm an Education USA manager here at the US UK Fulbright Commission. It's really lovely to have you with us today when we're going to be talking about American studies and opportunities to study in the US. American Studies is a really broad and interdisciplinary subject, and over the course of this session, we're going to explore how you can study and understand the United States through areas including history, culture, society, and politics. We're very pleased to be delivering today's session in partnership with British Association for American Studies, which brings together scholars, researchers, and students with an interest in the study of the United States. And today we have with us Dr. William D.J. Rees, who is going to quickly say hello.
Hello. Hi.
And Dr. William is going to be giving a brief introductory taster lecture, essentially, on his area of expertise. So, like I said, we're going to start by spending a little bit of time looking at what studying American studies at a UK university can look like, including the opportunities some students have to spend time studying in the US as part of their degree. We'll then have a sample American Studies lecture, giving you a chance to experience the kind of topics and questions you might encounter as a student. And finally, we'll have plenty of time for your questions, so do think about anything you'd like to ask as we go along and put your questions in the Q&A box. So whether you're already thinking about studying American Studies, you're interested in the United States more generally, or you're simply curious about what the subject could involve, hopefully you'll get something useful from today's session. So let's get started. So many of you may already be familiar with Education USA, but before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce who we are and how we can support you. The US-UK Fulbright Commission is a not-for-profit organisation jointly funded by the UK and US governments. We were established to promote peace and mutual understanding through educational and cultural exchange, based on the belief that bringing people together through education helps build stronger international relationships. We do this in two main ways. So the first is by administering Fulbright scholarships for postgraduate study, research and teaching between the UK and United States. And we also do this through Education USA, our official US education advisory service. So we are the official US higher education advising network supported by the US Department of State, and we're part of a global network of more than 400 advising centres in over 170 countries and territories, providing students with free, impartial and accurate advice about studying in the United States. Here at Fulbright UK, we're proud to be the official Education USA Centre for the UK, and our role is to support students at every stage of a journey, from exploring universities, navigating the application process, to preparing for your departure to the US. So even once you've started your degree, we're still here as a trusted source of information if you have questions about studying in the US or your future academic plans. So why are UK students attracted to studying in the US? The US offers a really wide range of opportunities for students, so I want to start by highlighting some of the reasons why students choose to study there. Firstly, reputation and variety. Did you know that there are more than 4,500 universities and colleges offering undergraduate degrees in the US compared to with around 120 in the UK? Within that, there is an enormous range of institutions, from large public universities to small liberal arts colleges, and from highly research-intensive universities to institutions with a much stronger focus on teaching. So in choosing a US university, we really encourage students to think about fit rather than simply looking for the universities they've already heard of. There are many excellent universities that may be unfamiliar to UK students. Another major attraction is campus life. US universities tend to place a much greater emphasis on getting involved outside the classroom. There are huge numbers of clubs, societies, music and performing arts opportunities, and sports at all levels. You might even find something very specific to a particular university. For example, the University of Wisconsin actually has a tradition of competitive log rolling. The next one on our list is academic flexibility. This is another important difference. Most US universities follow a liberal arts approach, which means you can explore a range of subjects along your main area of interest. You might combine engineering with art or history with chemistry, and in some cases, you can even change your academic direction once you're at university. That flexibility can be particularly attractive if you're not completely certain what you want to specialize in at 18. There are also lots of funding opportunities, including scholarships and other forms of financial aid. It may actually be more affordable than you think. And if you want more information on this, please do visit our website where we have a range of resources to help. Finally, there is the experience itself. So studying in another country can help you develop independence, cross-cultural communication skills, and international networks, all things that can strengthen your CV. And of course, you get the opportunity to actually experience American culture rather than just learning about it from the UK. The US is a huge and incredibly diverse country, so studying there can be an opportunity to explore not just a different educational system, but a very different part of the world. So if you're coming from the UK, what are the main things you need to understand about the US system? The first big difference is duration. An undergraduate degree in the US is typically 4 years compared with 3 years in England and Wales. Secondly, you generally apply to the university as a whole rather than applying directly to a specific degree program or department. This is linked to the liberal arts approach we just talked about. Depending on the university, you may not even need to declare your major when you apply, and you can sometimes change your academic direction once you're there, and that's actually quite normal. The US system also has much less centralization and standardization than we're used to here in the UK. There is no equivalent of UCAS, for example, and there aren't nationally set tuition fees, and universities can set their own admission requirements, deadlines, and processes. That's really great for choice, but it does mean that the process can take a little bit more research. The application itself can also be more involved, and admissions are generally more holistic. So universities may look at things such as your academic record, of course, but also at your activities outside of a classroom, essays and recommendations, rather than simply just focusing on your final grades. There isn't one central application system, although some universities use a shared platform called the Common App. And one particularly important point is that you need to think about funding from the beginning. In the US, you don't normally wait until you've been admitted and then start thinking about whether you can afford to attend. If you do, you might get a little bit disappointed. So if you are seeking institutional financial aid or scholarships, you need to apply for these alongside your admission application. And then finally, a note that there are some important exceptions to the 4-year undergraduate model, and that they are law and medicine, as these are generally postgraduate professions in the US. And there are other complexities associated with these fields generally. So everything we've just talked about is the experience of studying in the United States. But what if you're really interested in the US itself, rather than necessarily wanting to complete your whole degree there? Well, there is another option that you might not have considered, and that is studying about American studies from the UK. So, what actually is American studies? I think one of the most interesting things about American studies is that it's not simply a degree in American history. It's a genuinely interdisciplinary subject. You might be studying American history and politics, but you might also be studying literature, film, music, pop culture, sociology, or questions around identity and society. And that means you can approach the United States from lots of different directions. You could be interested in the American Civil War or the American Civil Rights Movement, for example, and look at that through history and politics. But you could also explore it through literature, photography, music, or film. Or you might be interested in something like pop culture. What can television tell us about American society? Why did particular types of music emerge in particular places and period? What do things like Hollywood, hip hop, rock, disco, or country music tell us about American identity? And importantly, you're not just learning facts about the US, you're learning to analyze them. You're asking questions such as, why did this happen? Whose perspective are we hearing from? How has America changed? And why do different groups experience America differently? And that's where American studies becomes particularly interested. So you're also studying America from the UK. So this is more of from a logistical perspective. You don't have to be physically in the US to develop a really sophisticated understanding of it. In fact, studying it from outside the country can give you a really interesting perspective. You're able to step back, question assumptions, and think about America in comparison with Britain and the rest of the world. And the really exciting part is that students who choose a degree with a US study abroad component, you can then take that academic knowledge and experience of the country you're studying from and experience it yourself. And that's what I want to talk about next. So this brings me to what I think is one of the really attractive things about studying American studies in the UK. So you can study America here and then go and experience it for yourself. A number of UK universities offering American studies have partnerships with universities in the US, allowing students to spend part of their degree studying abroad. The exact structure varies. At some universities, it might be a full year abroad. At others, there may be different options. So it's something you'd want to look at carefully when researching your courses. But essentially, you can spend the first part of your degree learning about American history, culture, politics, society, etc. from the UK. And then you have the opportunity to actually go to the US. And I think this is particularly valuable for American studies students because the country itself becomes part of your education. So imagine studying American music and then spending a year in a city with its own incredibly rich musical history. Or studying American politics and then finding yourself on an American campus discussing those issues with other American students. Or studying questions around regional identity and suddenly living in a completely different part of the US from anything you've previously experienced. Aside from this, you're also experiencing American higher education firsthand. You get to see what a US university campus is actually like, experiencing different approaches to teaching and learning, meeting American students, and potentially take courses that you wouldn't otherwise have access to at your UK university. And there's an important financial point here. If you're thinking, this sounds amazing, but studying in America must be incredibly expensive. A year abroad as part of a UK degree is very different from enrolling in a US university as an international student. You're normally going to the US as part of your existing UK degree rather than paying international tuition fees for a whole US degree. So your student finance can also continue to support you while studying abroad, and there may be additional funding available through schemes such as the Turing Scheme. So you can potentially get the US university experience without taking on the cost of a full US degree. Of course, the exact arrangements can vary between university, so when you're looking at American study courses, it's really important to check out what their US partnerships are, what you pay during the year abroad, and what funding opportunities there are. But financially, a year abroad can make experiencing US higher education much more accessible than going to the US for the entire degree. And that's what we were talking about at the beginning, what an entire degree looks like in the US compared to what American studies in a UK university can offer you. So the key point is you can potentially get the experience of studying in America without having to commit to the cost of doing your whole degree there. And I think that's a really appealing combination. So when you come back from the UK, you're not the same student. You've experienced another education system, lived somewhere different, met people from different backgrounds, and hopefully developed a much more nuanced understanding of the country you've been studying. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what American Studies can offer to you, not just as a way of learning about the United States, but as an opportunity to explore American culture and society from lots of different perspectives, and potentially to experience the country itself through a year abroad. But rather than me telling you what studying American Studies is like, we thought it would be much more useful to actually give you a taste of it. And that's where Dr. William comes in. So, William DJ Rees is an early career researcher and the early career representative for the British Association for American Studies. His research focuses on late 20th century hippie and disco cultures in the US. Those might not be the first subjects that come to mind when you think about studying America academically, but that's exactly what makes them such a great example of the breadth of American studies. Through things like music, pop culture, and social movements, you can ask much bigger questions about American society, identity, and change. So, William, we're going to hand over to you now for a taste of what American studies can look like in practice.
Thank you. Yes, American Studies, very flexible subject, expanding into music, literature, film, really anything just broadly under the topic of America. And I can really talk to this experience of studying America from afar. I've always studied America from within the UK. My own background as a historian has involved accessing archives within the UK and online, and often working with museums within the UK that are maybe managing American collections or have a focus on American history. So, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my own background in American history. I'll also talk a bit about my own expertise in American history. First of all, I just sort of talk about some of the idea of studying American studies within the UK. There are a lot of excellent American studies departments in the UK. You can do this as a bachelor's or a master's degree. I know, so near me at the moment is the University of Kiel. They have a fantastic department. Sussex, Manchester, University of East Anglia, Nottingham, Swansea in Wales, and Aberdeen in Scotland. There are many others, but these are just a few of the specific American studies departments. And of course, on degree courses across the UK, if you're studying history or English or politics, there are often many exciting opportunities to do modules specifically looking perhaps at American politics or American history. So if you are thinking about doing a more general subject rather than specifically American studies, do be sure to check out those websites and what the module diet offers. That just simply means that if you go on the website, say for a history course at, let's say, Manchester, they should have kind of year by year the typical modules you would expect to be doing. And typically for most courses, first year will have very set modules that you would be doing. And then second and third year would have more choice integrated into the course. Also talking about study abroad, this is an excellent opportunity to, maybe get a taste of being in America, but maybe you don't want to commit to a full 3-4 years in these States. You don't want to commit to the tuition fees as well in the States. And just to say that often if you're doing a UK course, you can apply for, this degree with study abroad. And then perhaps if you do the first year or this, you get through the first year and you decide that you maybe don't want to do study abroad, it's usually fairly straightforward if you want to drop this. So you can apply for it and then, not end up doing it. The reverse can also be true. If you start your first year, many universities would be open to you adding study abroad as long as your grades are fairly steady throughout that first year. So typically, as long as you kind of pass your first year modules, you would be you'd be likely to be accepted for your study abroad. But if over the first year you're doing a UK degree, just know that there would possibly be, if you're kind of a bit 50-50 on this idea, the option would still be open to you. To talk a little bit about my own work, so currently I am a researcher at the University of Colorado Boulder, and my own research involves interviewing people in the States online. I'm interviewing Latin American DJs from the 70s and the 80s, and just really talking about the Latin American influence on disco music and dance music. It's a really, really fun project. But all the work myself, I'm doing remotely online from the UK. So also bearing in mind, we live in a digital age, and there's so much wonderful American stuff that you can now access online. And there's so many wonderful archives within the UK. Much of the United States history before it became an independent country is British history as well. So very often you can find collections for that older history within the UK. To talk about my own path into American studies. So I studied at the University of Exeter's Cornwall campus. So they have a campus down in Penryn in Cornwall. And I knew that the history course I was doing had a number of American history modules. There was also a number of American politics modules. And one thing I liked about the University of Exeter is that if you were doing a course, say, in history, there were possibilities that you could kind of integrate modules from other disciplines into your course. So primarily I was doing history, but I could do a module in politics or a module in English as well, if that was on American sort of literature or American politics. So there was a way of me doing this history degree, but I was kind of integrating various subjects all within the wide sort of remit of American studies. So I did my BA at the University of Exeter, often, selecting American history modules, politics modules as I went on. And when it came to my dissertation, I really knew I wanted to do something grounded in American history. And I had lots of different ideas of what I might do. But to me, I really wanted my dissertation, which is a 10,000 word document. This is really the first 10,000 word piece of writing I ever did. And for many students, it's, the only time you're going to write something that enormous. So I decided I wanted it to be something fun, something that would keep me motivated. And for me, one thing that had always kept me motivated is disco music. I'd always really enjoyed listening to disco. And of course, the subject of history itself is so wide. Everything has a history. I kind of thought to myself, okay, I'll check this out. I wonder, where does disco come from? What does it say about our society that we listen to so much of this music? And my opening to my investigation of this was to watch the film Saturday Night Fever, which is probably what most people would think of when they think of disco. The classic John Travolta doing his sort of dance. He's wearing his white polyester suit. And I thought, yeah, that's going to be a fun movie about dancing. And I watched it, and yes, there is fun and there is dancing in Saturday Night Fever, but it's also a very serious movie. There's themes of suicide. There's themes of gang conflict. There are themes of economic depression in the United States. It's really, in many ways, quite a grim film, and the dancing that takes place within it is more like an escape from the difficult lives that people are living in 1970s America. So immediately this surprised me. Most people know of Saturday Night Fever. Not everyone actually has seen it. And then furthermore, as I dug into the history of the film itself was written by it was based on a journalist's story of someone who had visited New York, and they'd gone to one club in Brooklyn, And they based the entire article that they'd written upon just this one club. So then this whole film was based on a journalist article, and itself, a whole script was written around that, but it didn't quite reflect the true reality of the whole disco scene as it was for all the people who lived in it. So immediately, disco to me had this hook of, okay, that is not telling the full story of what this was. And as I investigated it, and as I interviewed people for this project, I interviewed people online from the States, people who'd been musicians, DJs, people who'd owned clubs, people who just danced simply in the clubs, people who had run radio stations. Gradually, it uncovered this history of this really diverse dance music, this diverse dance movement that happened in a really particular moment in American history. The 1970s are coming after the civil rights movement. So, really, there is this, as of 1965, you have the vote. Essentially, Black people can vote in America, whereas before 1965, many states had created laws that made it very difficult for Black people to vote. So, really, this is coming at a time in history where the United States, you could argue, is a full democracy for the first time. Everyone can vote. You also have other things going on. You have the women's liberation movement, and that's also propelled by new contraceptive pills that have really been a thing within the hippie movement and the peace movement of the 60s, this idea of free love. Well, free love is possible because you now have contraceptives more available than they had been before. You have the Vietnam War, which goes on up to 1973. The Vietnam War, as I'm sure most of you will know, is a very long conflict for the United States, and it's very traumatizing for a lot of people. Essentially, you have the draft happening, which is, and often, the draft would be announced on live television. There are this video footage of almost like a tombola of numbers being picked out of a tombola, and then it's like, well, if you were born within these years between December and November, you're up to fight. You're likely going to be going up to fight in Vietnam. So there's really these big seismic things going on in the 70s. You also have a massive recession in the 70s. This is partly triggered by an oil shortage, but there are many sort of economic problems happening in the 70s. So why then do you get this dance music that's all about being carefree and having a good time? Well, maybe it's related to all these things. It's related to this newfound sense that you can express of sexual freedom, of this is music that's being produced by a wider diversity of music artists. Within disco, really, you have African Americans, Latin Americans, Italian Americans really at the forefront of the performances, dominating this genre in a way that they just don't. They hadn't dominated the pop and rock charts of the 60s. So you have all these kind of different influences going on in society, and disco is kind of responding to that world. It's kind of glittery, it's kind of carefree, but it's all those things within a decade where Americans are feeling a lot of pressure. It's also important to remember that Watergate happens in the 70s. President Nixon essentially is found to have lied to the American people about, not spying on his rivals in the Democratic Party. And then he's found on tape that to be asking people to sort of cover up, essentially, that he's been asking people to spy on his opposition. And that also leads to a sort of feeling of distrust in American leaders. And the Vietnam War has ended really in a defeat for the United States. There's really this sense that maybe the United States is not on the path to, remaining the world superpower, perhaps the USSR will overtake it eventually, or even the Japanese economy or the West German economies, which are doing very well in the 70s. So there's all these kind of things going on. And disco, whereas it seems really carefree, is kind of quite significant in being, I would argue, the first real pop music movement in which you have diversities of different peoples on the dance floor. And added to that sense of sexual liberation on the dance floor is, of course, Stonewall and the gay civil rights movement. So from the late 60s into the early 70s, gay people see the example of women demanding reproductive freedom. They look at the peaceful protest of the Black civil rights movement, and they say that civil rights should also be extended to us. We should not have to hide our identity. And often discotheques become really the organizing spaces. They become the places where people gather within these gay communities and listen to gay artists like Sylvester, artists that really make them feel seen for the first time in popular culture. So disco, to put it simply, yes, it seems apolitical, but to many people, disco really did feel quite a radical thing. And it's also very easy, to forget how new and interesting disco sounded in the 70s. We might have been introduced to this music through the radio, through an advert. But at the time, it really did sound like nothing that had come before. It was so catchy. It's got its four on the floor beat. It's got the luscious orchestration. And all these kind of exciting ideas are contained in it, all this optimism, despite all the problems that are going on in the 70s, there is also an optimism to disco. There is the kind of promise of post-civil rights. There is this idea that you live in a world now where you have the United Nations after World War II, and you have this idea that European empires are dismantling too. In the 70s, you have sort of European empires that have existed for centuries dismantling and new countries being formed. The United Nations is growing to be a much larger club of nations. And there's kind of this confidence that maybe also the world can be a more peaceful and loving place. Maybe we can construct something new. So it's kind of, in a sense, disco is it's kind of an escape from all the problems of the world. But it's also filled with this heady optimism of maybe a better world can be created. Vietnam was horrible. Segregation and racism was horrible, is horrible. But maybe we can create something better. Maybe on dance floors, coming together and dancing together, physically being in each other's presence. That is what it's all about. It's not about these shady people like Richard Nixon. It's about us as ordinary folk coming together and actually just talking and being in the same space, dancing the world's problems away. So anyway, that was kind of my dissertation. And I felt super motivated doing it because it tied into all these ideas in American studies and American history. There is this idea of what does it mean to be free? Freedom is this massive theme in American history. And certainly disco had that sense of, what does it mean to dance? What does it mean for, two gay men or two lesbians to dance together after a period in which that thing had been pretty much illegal in most cities? Or if not, formally illegal in most cities, then something that was extremely frowned upon, very taboo. So that idea of freedom, I also like in the idea of disco, it became quite a commercial phenomenon as the 70s went on. By the late 70s, disco kind of develops into a bit like AI at the moment. Everything becomes disco. As everything has become AI, everything goes disco, and it kind of becomes this commercial bubble. And then as of 1979, there's suddenly a lot of music labels turn away from disco because they all get frightened that the money well is going to dry up with disco, that people's tastes are going to change. So there's also that big theme of American history, capitalism and spectacle as well involved. And also the struggle for racial equality, for sexual equality, for gender equality. All these are big themes of American history, and I really enjoyed studying it. After I finished my bachelor's, I did my master's by research at the same campus at the University of Exeter. For this, I took the opportunity to do something slightly different. I continued to do the history of music, but I looked at the history of indigenous popular music. So one thing that had really interested me is the Village People, who were a very popular disco band. They had a performer amongst them, the Indian of the group, or the Native American, Philip Rose. And I really wanted to sort of delve into his story and what is the history of how Native American identity is performed in popular music, and how do Native Americans themselves present it, or how is it misrepresented in popular culture. So for my master's, I did a thesis really thinking about that. And I was fortunate enough within the UK to be able to draw upon many resources from archives and museums within the UK. So even near Cornwall, in Devon, in the city of Exeter, the Ram Museum has large collections of Blackfoot indigenous items. Some of these collections are quite contentious within the UK, whether or not the UK should be in possession of some of these items, but they are very sort of accessible within the UK, and were very useful in sort of doing this project. I think also a statement to the availability of sources in UK archives and museums is the recent 250th anniversary of the United States. As you probably may have seen on, the BBC, ITV, there is a lot of things that we in the UK can say about the United States. It's very entwined into our own history. Many of the items from the early history are based within the UK, and even even after the American Revolution, the UK has tended to have very avid collectors of American items. We have the special relationship. There's really a feeling in the UK, a fascination in America. And likewise, in America, British studies is a very popular program. We also have near Bath, we have the museum, the American Museum and Garden, the American Museums and Garden, which is an excellent museum, which feel free to check out. But that also has large collections of American items. We have Benjamin Franklin House in London, just to name a few sort of American-specific museums. And also those do offer the opportunity of, if you are doing a degree program within the UK, there are excellent opportunities to volunteer at these sorts of spaces. So you can be around America's past without even setting foot within the country. And then, of course, I did, so my PhD was, again, at the University of Exeter. I really liked the campus I was at in Cornwall. And even though Cornwall itself is very distant, it was very useful to have these collections near to me in places like Plymouth and Exeter, but also that we live in an online age. So I was able to conduct my interviews with people online. And my PhD was kind of like an expansion of my BA dissertation. So I was interviewing more people, kind of just doing everything on a bigger scale and thinking about what disco really said about the United States in the 1970s. Before I head to questions, I'll also just bring up that there are also organizations within the UK. Whether or not you decide to go to the United States, you can access these. So if you go to the USA, you could still be involved with these organizations, but just to show that there are also organizations within the UK, if you're studying here, that can make you feel involved with these sorts of things. So, of course, myself, I'm part of the British Association for American Studies. this is a really good organization. They put on events. There's an annual conference. And typically, these sorts of organizations will have a cheaper fee if you're an undergraduate student or a high school student. British Association for American Studies, BAS, also has things like funding grants that are worth checking out. I think it has a high school essay prize. It certainly does have an undergraduate essay prize. And we have various essay prizes if you're interested in, just having a go at writing on a certain topic and, just you're in a competitive mood. So do check out BAS if you're really interested in American studies. There's also more specific organizations. For one, there's HOCUS. HOCUS is Historians of the 20th Century United States, which if you're more of a Cold War or early 20th century sort of person, that might also be worth checking out. I know that they also have essay prizes for students. There's Branch is I'm not part of this organization myself, but I think it's roughly something along the lines of British researchers of the American 19th century or American 19th century literature. So if you're really into 19th century literature, particularly from an American perspective, they might also be worth checking out. And also, of course, as myself, a historian, there's the Royal Historical Society, which also offers grants, and there are essay competitions for high school students and undergraduate students as well. And of course, the Royal Historical Society is not American specific, but does, if you're an American historian, is something that's worth checking out. So, yeah, thank you for your time, and I'm open to questions. Thank you. Q&A. Hello. Is
Oh,
there
so
a
sorry. Hello. Um, so we've got about 10 minutes or so of um, Q&A. If anyone's got anything they'd like to ask, please do pop it into the box. Um, it can be about anything. It can be about studying in the US. It could be about American studies program in the UK, or it can be about Dr. Williams' work and experiences. So feel free to type up any questions you may have. Um, so I've got a question here that I'm happy to answer. Is there a deadline for applications to study in the US? So this is a bit tricky because, like I said, different universities in the US have different timelines. So it really does depend on the institutions you are interested in. So what I'd recommend you doing is kind of first of all, have a look at our website because that gives you some tips to kind of follow and an order to kind of proceed if studying in the US is something you're really interested in. Um, and when you narrow down the universities that you're interested in, it's best to look directly on the website, the university website itself, because that will give you all the kind of all their specific dates and their timelines. Um, Applications tend to open kind of in the fall, so in the autumn, and the deadlines will vary from institution to institution. But like I said, what I'm going to do is pop into the chat very shortly our advising email. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can drop us an email. And also, I will drop you a link to our website that contains all of this great information. And William, I've got a question here for you. So what are you working on at this very moment, and has your research taken you in any unexpected directions?
Yes. So at the moment, I have been working with the University of Colorado Boulder, a researcher based there. And I've been looking at Latin American DJs and interviewing people overseas. But in my own research, I have surprisingly come to be researching hippies a lot more. So, having studied the 1970s and disco, the more I've been thinking about it and the more I've been researching it, I see these links between the 60s and the 70s. So, you have this countercultural movement in the 60s, which, of course, is very much about dressing down, growing your hair out, wearing sandals, all that sort of stuff. And I don't think that's unrelated from the 70s, even though you have the opposite style. It's people trying to look fabulous, trying to, really, really peacock around and look their best. Um, so researching the 60s has been kind of thinking, how do you go from one thing to the other thing? Why is the disco style following from the hippie style? And a lot of that has been quite fun because it's involved looking at archives in the United States. And the hippies were just quite fun, really. Their protests are very creative and they just have this really mischievous attitude. So it's been really fun to do that. So that's kind of what I'm doing at the moment. I just also wanted to add a note to the last question you had and just sort of recommend to anyone listening that you check out deadlines early. You don't want to be rushing these things. And really, you write down, have a physical list ideally, or an Excel spreadsheet where you put down all your preferences for universities, what their deadlines are. Because, as has been said, in America, it's a lot less centralized. You have different states, which, this is not really the same as the UK, where we have different counties. Different states often have very different, very different laws, very different kind of traditions of scholarship within them and university traditions. So really just be organized and just have it somewhere in front of you where you can visualize it. Maybe have it in order of deadlines or in order of your preference.
Absolutely, and that's a really, really great piece of advice. And like I said, you should have received now um, a link to our guidance, our online guidance, which takes you through some more tips and lots of information, everything from doing your research, looking at funding, application process, all the way through to departure. So if actually studying a view in the US is something you're interested in, please have a look. There is also some information about American studies as well on our website. So please do check it out. And if you have any questions, let us know. Um, William, I have another question for you. If you were starting an American Studies degree today, what would you be most excited to explore?
That's a very good question. I think a really nerdy response would be the US Constitution. I think just because of the climate we're living in as well at the moment in the United States, that there's been so much politics happening and so many sort of norms being broken in recent years, and so many really important Supreme Court rulings. I think the idea of studying really the Constitution and just how the United States government and its judiciary, um, how the different branches of government and, of course, the executive, the president, how these are supposed to function. How did the founding fathers intend this to work? I've been watching The West Wing recently, which is a TV show from the early 2000s, and it's a fictional White House, really good TV show. If any of you are interested in American politics and just getting a kind of rough idea of how it works, the West Wing is a really good fictional representation of how the running of the White House is supposed to work. And each episode usually kind of goes through a different quirk of the US system, how it functions. But yeah, my nerdy response would be the Constitution and how the powers in the United States, how they're supposed to be separated. And because these are really integral to conversations people are still having today, more so now than ever, I'd say.
Great, thank you so much. And just one last question, if that's okay. Um, what kind of skills do you think students develop through studying American studies, and where do you think those skills can take you after university?
Um, Excellent question. Um, I think you get critical analysis, so the ability to look at sources or to look at material and really question it. Um, this is a really highly valued skill in many professions, whether it's teaching, whether it's in law, really any profession. They want people who can think creatively, that can look at problems and think for themselves. It's also just a really generally good ability to have in life, not just for reading the news, for having conversations, but living in a sort of data space that we do where there's misinformation, there's AI produced stuff. This idea to read things and think or see things and really think for oneself of like, is this a reliable source? What is this trying to evoke in me? That is a really important skill for life because primarily you spend your life within your own head. It's really good to have that skill so that you can really kind of analyze things and get the most out of stuff. American studies also shows that you have a very international outlook in a very international world that we live in. You can think about cultures perhaps that are different to your own. The United States is a different culture to the UK, and it's a very diverse culture in that. The United States, thinking about the difference between New Jersey and Mississippi, just in terms of geography, the populations of these places, it shows that you can really understand a country that is the size of a continent. So it's that idea of you can work with kind of cultural understanding of how the world is such a diverse place. And I think America also just gives you a really good understanding of the world we now live in. I do firmly believe we are still in the American century. We are still in the sort of post 1945 world that America has shaped our economic institutions, our culture. So understanding the United States and its sheer power, I think, helps us understand who we are across the world in countries like the UK, France, wherever. These are all very transferable skills. It shows that you are able to think beyond yourself and have an idea of the world that we live in. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, William. That has been super, super informative and a really interesting listen. So thank you to you for joining us this evening. We've really gained a great insight into your experiences and your specialism as well. Um, and yes, on behalf of US UK Fulbright Commission and Education USA, thank you for being with us this evening. Um, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for listening today as well. If you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate in contacting us on advising@fulbright.org.uk. We answer every email, no matter how big or small your query is. We're here to help. So please do get in touch. We look forward to hearing from you. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, William, for joining us. And have a great evening, everyone.